So I started this topic before and we only got a third of the way through it. If you haven't told your story about how you got to community radio, tell us now.
That's a good one.
If you want to, I don't control this conversation.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. Why don't
I
you?
was on that call.
What's that?
I said I was on that call.
Nice.
So
Yeah, but Joseph, I don't quite
pass on to
remember
somebody else.
Joseph, I don't quite remember your story.
Well, let me play it back, okay?
Yeah.
I want to hear your story, Joseph.
Again?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, once upon a time, I was just out of college. Actually, I started college 11 years after I graduated high school, so I wasn't a teenager when I did this. I came home and backed into a radio station that was under construction. It was still a pile of papers. And I had talked with this fellow when I was in college during the summer, working in another camp. And that's all he talked about was radio, 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 radio. And because he was helping to build 10-watt radio stations for small universities and communities. And so he had that background, he had that interest. So when I moved back home, who'd I run into but this same guy? And I said, what are you doing here? So I'm building a radio station for the Hoopa tribes, the education office. I said, whoa, okay. So he said, come to a meeting. So I went to the meeting, and being a tribal member and showing up with this guy who is involved in this radio, they appointed me as being on the radio committee for the education committee. So I was the point person for the radio project for the Hoopa Valley tribe, with not knowing anything. So but I still knew more than anybody else there. So he took me to an NFCB regional conference in Fresno, which is on the other end of the state. And that's where I first met people who actually do community radio. And what we were told at that time, when we wanted to do a 10-watt radio station, the FCC said, no, you cannot do a 10-watt radio station because we're not going to build any more 10-watt radio stations. You got to go full power or nothing. So that's why we had to go to community radio, the non-commercial education band. So that's what I was learning from other people who already had community radio stations, and they were talking a lingo I didn't know, NFFS and da-da-da-da and all that. So he said, don't worry, you just ask anybody and we'll tell you. And I thought, wow, that's really cool, because these people are really open. They submit a proposal and they'll share it with you. Say, yeah, this is what we're going after and this is what we're going to do, and da-da-da. And you worked in the Department of Labor, worked in the Department of Education, and nobody shares anything in those agencies. But radio, open book. Yeah, I'll tell you the whole story. I'll spill the beans and you go after it if you want. Good luck. So that's how I started. I saw the value of the community radio system and what it can do, and I kept on building from there until we got the station on the air at 40 years ago yesterday. It was our 40th anniversary yesterday at 10 o'clock.
Wow.
So 14,611th day of continuous broadcasting. Not 24 hours a day. We didn't start there. We only became 24 hours a day once we got the satellite system in. Then we went 24/7. But until then, we were started out maybe 15 hours a day. Then we got into CPB. You had to get 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. So now we're 24/7. And fewer people now than we had way back then. But so we're always building, always trying things, and networking. That's where it's at. It's all in the networking. Got to open that door. What's behind that door? Well, there's a lot of content if you deep dive into it. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
What are your passions? What have you found that you really enjoyed doing the most, Joseph?
Production, long form production. I've won NFCB awards, a Silver Wheel Award for production. I did a half-hour production I did about the bringing back the Karuk jump dance after it hasn't been done in 99 years. And a group of people got together and they restored the dance grounds, and I helped work on that and got to know all the people. And I participated in it because it's the same dance we do. And I was a part of that. And after it was over, I thought, wow, I'd like to tell that story. But I couldn't tell the story of the actual ceremony, the actual dance or the religious part of it. So I went with the, how did you like doing it? How did you feel about doing it? What did you experience? And what can you share about that experience? How did it make you feel? So I got a lot of people giving me their stories, and I weaved it all together and did a half-hour production. We were doing at that time, me and my wife, she has a Northern California Cultural Communications, is a nonprofit that she runs, and we were doing it was an audio program. We had Peggy Berryhill and Susan Newston, and we were three out-of-work station managers. We got together in our living room and said, well, let's come up with a radio show. Let's come up with a program. Let's come up with a project. So we put together a 10-part series. That's what we're thinking about anyway, of stories about Indian communities. And we end up creating the California Indian Radio Project. We thought, well, we'll start this working title and we'll come up with a really good name after when it's all done. That never appeared. So it's always stayed the California Indian Radio Project, a 10-part half-hour series about life in Native California. From the current, we didn't do any history. We had a support of some tribal California Native elders who we met, and they told us, we asked them, well, what do you want out of this program? And they said, we don't want to hear crybaby Indians. We want to hear real stories. We want to hear the emotions and okay, we can talk about some things in the past, but I want you to tell us the story of our future. What do people want? And they gave us 17 topics, and we boiled it down to 13 because that's the usual amount for a series. And we interviewed 247 California natives on various topics. And I focused on the California, or the, what do you call it? Balancing time, balancing, I forget the name of that program now. Balancing Life, Dancing, and Time. That's the name of the program that I did on the Kurik jump dance. So that was that part. And so I really liked doing that, and working with Peggy Berryhill taught me a lot. I thought I knew production work, but working under her, geez, she just worked and worked and worked. I know you can't say it that way. Say it this way. No, not that way. Do it this way. That was great. And it stuck. So yeah, I do that now, and that's my passion. I didn't want to be the manager. I wanted to be working. I want to tell the stories. I want to hear the stories. I want to tell the stories. So that's what I get to do now. So I stepped aside as the station manager. I'm now the lead producer and mentor. So if they get another station manager, I could, I see you, Alicia. I could help them network with everybody else that's in community radio.
So tell us how you go about your networking. You said networking was such a big thing. How do you do that? Tell us about your
I make cold calls. I'm not bashful. People think I am bashful because I'm quiet most of the time, if you don't know me. But if I have to learn something and I hear that there's somebody that knows that, it doesn't bother me to get on the phone and ask them what they know. So I heard that you know this, and I just want to know, I just have some questions. How do you get there? What, how do you do that? I have no idea. And just listen to them. And then they lead me on to other people. And then I go to conferences. I love the NFCB conferences when there's 300 and some members, and grassroots radio. I think I was at the first few of those. And then the virtual one, that was really interesting. It's the first time I ever involved in a virtual conference at all. And it works. I was kind of doubtful at first, but it does work. It has a lot of value. And saves a lot of money, saves you some time, but it still has value. I like that. But I still like to have that person-to-person thing where you can go out and have coffee and have a meal with your colleagues. And that's, yeah. I'm looking forward to doing some more of that at some point. Maybe it's just around the corner. I don't know. So actually see you. Bigger than this, you know.
That sounds.
I'll be able to see what shoes you're on.
That's the dream.
Yeah. Maybe you got slippers. I don't know.
Well, for those who have newly joined us, we're doing a reprieve of one of our old meetings of sharing how we got into community radio. Does anyone else want to step up and go next?
I will.
Okay. Cynthia.
I created my podcast focused on Albany, and I was at a common council meeting in Albany, and the fellow sitting next to me gave me a card for the newly formed WCAA. I started going to the meetings, and then I had my own show, and that's how I got started. From a podcast to a radio show.
So did you know from the get-go what you wanted to talk about?
Well, when I did focus on Albany, since Albany is the seat of government in New York State, I wanted to network with all of the legislators, and then I got interested in state issues and local issues, and then national issues through my All Exits Closed. And Steve and I have done many, many shows on national issues. So I really like it. I think, you know, it's kind of a refreshing type thing where people can listen and not get a bunch of crap that they hear. So that's how I got started.
That's always a positive.
Right.
Well, and Steve, it sounds like you've done radio too before you were into politics.
Well, my background in radio came through music. You know, I'm a musician, and I've worked in original bands, you know, really all my life, from my early 20s to the present, although currently not working due to COVID-19. You know, so I actually have a relationship with radio that goes back, you know, 40 years, and that included a couple of opportunities at college radio, WKCR, at Columbia, and my path to political commentary on radio kind of came looking for me a few years ago, because somebody who had previously been a regional rock station program director and disc jockey by the name of Jimmy Buff started putting together a plan for himself to, he wanted to do something more worthwhile with his radio experience. And he somehow found a way to make a connection with Peter Buffett, I don't know if anyone knows that name. I can't remember the name of his foundation. He's a son of Warren Buffett, and he spends a tremendous amount of money on progressive and community goals. That's what he's doing with his life right now. And he basically financed for Jimmy the creation of a community radio station, bought a going out of business local station in Kingston, New York. And
Wait, Peter Buffett was working for Jimmy Buff? Is that?
well, yeah, it's weird. No, actually, I guess Jimmy's working on a grant from Peter. It's not really a direct employment situation. Peter is the funding source, and he kind of has unlimited funds
Wow.
because of his lineage, and he does amazing, amazing things with those funds. I know this is kind of a growing trend right now among some segment of the children of great privilege and wealth in this country to be financing progressive institutions, and even overtly socialist ones beyond what you would see from a George Soros type. Peter is doing great things with the opportunities that life has presented to him, and Jimmy Buff in particular then basically started a new community radio station focusing on Kingston and then some wider affairs. And he invited me because I was prominent in his broadcast radius, and he had known me going back quite some time, probably back to the same-sex marriage days here in New Paltz, where he used his platform on local rock radio. And so he extended the invitation to me to come in once a week and do half an hour of commentary on his station, and I have been doing that probably about 3 years now. I've had to take a couple of breaks that I've taken voluntarily in order to pursue ballot politics. I do not mix foundation work and media with ballot politics. I don't consider that ethical, so I've taken a couple of breaks when I've gone back into the ballot arena, and now I'm back to not being in the ballot arena, and kind of breathing a sigh of relief about that. But I try to bring a perspective to what I do that reflects what's been working for me in my actual life. We oftentimes hear about, do you live in a bubble? What can you do to get out of your bubble? Well, and I don't live in a bubble, and I've never lived in a bubble. I'm very open and out about my politics. People know who I am and what I'm about everywhere I go. But that includes getting on fire trucks in a rural community. That's where I spend half my life, is around people that are not left-wing, blue-collar New York City intellectual types. They are rural volunteer firefighter types. And I've always discovered that if you remove the constraint of political tribalism from people's relations, that we absolutely do have a tremendous amount of common ground and agreement. We, unfortunately, to a large extent in the media, and even in independent media, we see a tremendous amount of gatekeeping about certain boundaries of vocabulary and whether you can be seen with certain kinds of people or seen, and what we've ended up with as a result of that is more of a system of how we identify who we are than whether we're being persuasive and increasing our numbers and bringing unlikely constituents to an issue that can help get it accomplished. And I really liken my politics to what we do in the fire department. The pager goes off and we go. Whatever the incident is, a smoke detector, a structure fire, a car accident, whatever it is, minor, major, anything, everybody gets in the truck and goes. Nobody asks, hey, who lives there? You get to that upside down car and you peek underneath it and you don't go, oh, I know that guy. Screw that guy. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's totally out of anybody's frame of consciousness. It's get the job done. And people who don't agree with each other, the one thing we agree on is that every job that comes in on that pager has to get done. It's an emergency. It has to get done. And so oftentimes I restrict myself to speaking issue by issue rather than to a massive agenda and platform, because just as an example, something that's actually happening right now, I'm working with someone who's extremely informed and a fantastic communicator on racism and the history of racism and existing institutional racism and the institutional momentum of institutional racism. An African American that I work with very, very closely. He's not necessarily where I would like to be on, traditional gender roles inside a married family. What he practices in his home and how his religion informs what he believes, how that should operate versus what I do in my much more contemporary and secular family. I am not going to stop working with him. Like when somebody says, oh my God, how could you deal with someone with such a reactionary approach to family dynamic? And I'd be like, wait a second. And so that's kind of what I want to continue bringing to what I do in public outreach. I think that coalitions can be evolving and revolving. I think that what you need to do is get downfield. You need to move another 10 yards. You may not make it all the way to the end zone on this play, but you're 10 yards closer than where you started. And if you don't like, if you won't hand off the ball to a particular running back, the ball's not going anywhere. I'm trying to unravel tribalism a little bit, and deal with issues on facts, analysis of those facts, strategic concerns that can get the ball across the goal line. And so I want very much to be able to expand that conversation. I think we are more fortified now. I mean, I'm 59 years old, and I don't think that this country has ever been more fortified behind tribal boundaries than since 1860. And we all know how that went. And, we just saw with the challenge to the election results that there are far more people than any of us should be comfortable with right now that would rather defend their ideology than defend democracy. And we don't want to keep heading down that path. We should never have continued the Kansas-Nebraska Act being passed in 1854. It took until 1861 for the shooting to start. But when the Whig Party collapsed in the aftermath of that legislation, everyone should have seen where we were heading. I kind of feel like we're in another version of that developing right now, and I definitely want to run interference against all of that. There are times every day where I will attract some ire, because I'm unwilling, the way I just spelled it out right now, I will not give somebody a spelling test before I taught them the alphabet. If somebody fails the spelling test, but I never taught them the alphabet, then some of the burden of that is on me for having put the cart before the horse. And so that's where I'm going to be operating now, for the content. I do not say things that are offensive, but I occasionally present strategies and tactics that can make people who are comfortable in their silos feel uncomfortable, upfront about that. So
I'm curious.
That's where we are. That's where I am now.
When you say, I think it's interesting what you're saying about wanting to relate to everybody as people first and not just what team you're on, but also wanting to say your own truth, how do you walk that line?
Well, the way I walk the line, that's where the electoral end it came to inform me in ways that most people probably couldn't have imagined. I went out on the campaign trail as a green, as a naked socialist. I went out doing that thing, and I went all over this very rural district for 2 consecutive election cycles, and found out that I was getting a better reaction from Republicans than from Democrats, because I was presenting the same ideas that progressives are presenting, but from a different framework that spoke more to the lived experience of the people that were hearing the information. As an example, when I told people about single-payer medical insurance, I told them that due to the expense of public employee medical insurance, that switching to that would drop their property taxes by 16 to 20%. I told people at chambers of commerce that they are, that they are the only producers in the world that have to incorporate employee medical insurance into the price of their products, and that therefore they're not price competitive with the rest of the world, and that this continues to suppress their ability to operate their business in a climate here domestically in which only from 5 to 10% of startups succeed and the rest go bankrupt within 5 years. You speak to them in those terms, and suddenly you've got a whole lot of people that love the idea of single payer, but when you went to them and presented it on moral grounds, which is perfectly valid, and I do present it on moral grounds all the time. It's not like I disaggregate the moral, the moral imperative from the rest of it. But people have different morals. They may not necessarily share my morals. And, people who are anti-abortion, they are absolutely convinced that they are saving living creatures that should be allowed to be born and then maybe given up to adopt, whatever it may be. They believe it. It's moral. My moral feminism is not superior to their moral defense. We can't have that argument. So if we're going to talk about reproductive choice, we have to come at it through a different door, without eliminating the moral argument, but just expanding the range of communications through which you're going to be discussing it. And so I really learned that on the road. When I spoke to people about a Green New Deal, instead of talking about it as this massive, $30 trillion federal, all-encompassing federal program, which terrifies, rural people about, exploding massive government control, instead I talked about how if people are going to get heat pumps, or people going to get geothermal installed around their houses, that's going to be the biggest infusion of contracts to small local excavators and plumbers and electricians in the history of the United States. And everybody went nuts for it. They were like, oh, that's great. An interviewer at public television out of Binghamton, actually, during an interview, in the middle of it, he interrupted and he said, "This really sounds to me like everything you're presenting is going to be just as appealing to conservatives as to liberals." And so that, validated to me, as well as the reaction of people on the ground coming to me after debates and saying, I'm going to be voting for you. I'm a Republican. I wanted you to know that. And then looking at the results and finding out that my vote totals were running 2 to 6 times better rate on average in Republican counties than in Democrat ones. And I suddenly realized, we can do this if we're just not, if we don't disempower people who want to speak about it come in through a different door, carrying the same message, but through a different door where people have their welcome mat laid out instead of the other door where they have all their fortifications laid out. That we can find that common ground. Right now, most people don't want single payer healthcare because they think it's socialism. I mean, of the people who don't want it, they don't think of it as a way to dramatically reduce their property taxes. you know, because nobody speaks of it that way. And you kind of lose support from the liberal side if it seems like you're de-emphasizing um, the moral element. But I don't think that you're actually promoting a moral element if you're not actually moving towards achieving your moral goal. If you're not bringing in, you know, unlikely allies, the most moral thing you can do is actually get single payer delivered, get it done. Then the morality question is solved. But if you're raising barriers to making the thing politically viable, then you're kind of more being self-righteous than moral. You know, you're moral when you get the job done, the moral job, that moral thing you're trying to accomplish. Anyway, that's where, you know, I learned how accessible people are. You know, first I learned it in fire trucks, but then I learned it on the ground in political environments. People don't actually want you know, a red-blue civil war. I mean, some people do, but most people don't. And so I think that I can be a voice in opening up that kind of approach, walking around people's places where people are and see which doors have the welcome mats on it and which ones are bristling with guns, and go around to the ones with the welcome mats.
Thank you, Steve. That was very thoughtful. Anyone else want to talk about?
I'd like to say something, Stephanie.
Sure.
I've known Steve for a few years now, and we've had, you know, many discussions about issues that are going on now. And from my perspective, elected politics might not necessarily be the end all be all. I mean, doing something like on Pacifica, being on the radio, where you could do it more than just an election cycle is important. People do the election cycles, they lose, you never hear from them again. So I think something like public radio is important because you get the message out even if it's not an election cycle.
Yeah, true.
How about Alicia's story?
Yeah, let's hear Alicia's story.
About what? About which story?
How you got
How I came. What? How I came to radio?
Yes.
How I came to radio? Well, with KBBF, it's I came to Santa Rosa in 1969, and the Bilingual Broadcasting Foundation, which is like the foundation that started KBBF, it was in 1971, and then in 1973, KBBF came on the air. So during that whole time, I kind of knew some of the founders, but I went off to college and then got married, went all through, did all this other stuff, and came back in 1986. And so I started organizing an independent union here with my ex, who now is my ex-husband, and a group of other activists. And it was predominantly all Mexican. It was Mexican and Central American workers and 75% women. And we, after 3 years, we had a contract. But during that whole time, I used the radio station, KBBF, because I knew people and everything else to promote the union struggle that was going on, the trying to, and this union struggle that we did in the 80s was, we tried to combine, not just viewed, for example, we had what is called a community labor strategy, that you don't separate the community from the workers, which is sometimes what happens. You know, the workers are over here in the community. So we try to do the whole thing of cross boundaries, but Steve was talking to peace people, the anti-war people, the gay and lesbian community at that time, and all of this, trying to get them to come in and be part of the union struggle that we were trying to accomplish. But we did it through KBBF in that sense of going to the airwaves, because we knew that a lot of the people that we were organizing were listen to the radio, and that way we could also sort of give, since I couldn't go door to door, house to house to organize some of the workers, this was a faster way. I always feel the airwaves are very powerful, very much what like Cynthia was saying, they're very powerful tool, and we need to be aware of that. But it wasn't until in that then during that whole time, after I was here for a while, about 15 years ago, there was a lot of conflict at KBBF and everything else. And then about 10 years ago, I decided to, at one point I ran for the board, and it was really just very bad situation. And so then in about 10 years ago, a young man said to me that, because people knew me in the community and they kind of view me as a person that can bring people together. And he asked me if I could come to the radio, and just for 2 weeks, he said, just for 2 weeks, be on the board of directors so that you can try to help us out, kind of try to soften some of the blows that are going on and everything else. And so 2 weeks turned into 10 years. and here I am 10 years later. I always tell people that November 7th, 2010, I was at a board meeting where there was so much conflict that half of the board, walked out, and I was left. The board, the president threw his resignation letter on the desk right there in front of me, and said, "You're it, Alicia." And I always say that if you were if you were out in the audience at that moment, you would be on my board, because I told everybody, okay, so who like to be a nominate? Since I knew most people, I said nominate. Like in this case, I would say nominate Joseph. Hey, Joseph, somebody. I nominate Joseph. Joseph, yes, you do want to be on the board, right? Yes, okay. Now here, do you have $20 to become a member of KBVF? They don't. And I always carry membership card, membership thing. So I pulled one out and I said, okay, somebody, well, Joseph doesn't have $20. Somebody lend him $20 right now. Here we are. Okay, sign you. Come on in. You're on it. But somebody, do you not nominate? Yes, I nominate him, and I second it. And everybody who's for Joseph being on the board, he is now. Come over here, Joseph, from the audience. Can't get over on this side. And that's how I created the first board, out of just grabbing whoever. I actually literally have, after a few meetings, one particular young guy came in and said, I really, well, he wasn't so young. He's I guess my age, but at that time I still always view him young. He said, Alicia, you know what? I'm a painter, I'm a homeboy. I don't like meetings. I don't like any of this stuff. Please let me go, because I would tell them, I wouldn't let people go. But what happened is that, I created a board and when I found out that situation that KBBF was in 2010 was really drastic, the best way that a friend of mine once told me, when I went and talked to him just a few years ago, I talked to him and I said to him, because somebody was questioning my leadership, if I was a good leader or not. And I'm a person that will take criticism. I always tell people, you can always come and talk to me and tell me what I'm doing wrong. And I did this to a volunteer one day. I just 2 years ago said, you can come and tell me what's wrong, what I'm doing wrong and everything. And I can just tell you that the first thing that's gonna come to my head is F you when you criticize me. And the poor young girl must flip, off the table. And I said, I used a bad word. I used a bad word with her. And so she flipped. I said the F word. And I said, and she just looked like that. And I said, wait a second, don't pass out yet. Let me just tell you. what happens is I always, when people say something to me, I'm human. My first reaction is gonna be F you in my head. That's just comes, right? When somebody tells me, but I said, but you'll see, it will never come out of my mouth. You know, it'll stay in my head. I will keep my mouth shut. And that's what my advice to my sons are. Whenever somebody comes at you, you go through the F you stage in your head with your mouth shut. And then go home. I mean, go step away from the, wherever, and then reflect. Because you got to understand that if that person came and talked to you, to tell you something, to criticize you, or to just, whether it's constructive or whatever, maybe they don't do it in the right tone that you would like them to tell you that you're doing something wrong. That took courage. I said, so I always come back and look at it. And I told this young woman, I said, I'll come back and I'll reflect, and then I'll come back and say, no, you know what? You are right. Or maybe you're half and half right. Or maybe you're totally wrong, but I'll be in a calmer way that you will be able to listen to me and know that I really reflected on what you said, because it took courage for you to say it. So with that in mind, I got my board at that time, 10 years ago, and I told them all that so when somebody told me that I wasn't a good leader, that, at one point, a few years ago, I went and talked to some friends and said, who I trusted, tell me if I'm doing a good job in leading KBBF in the right direction and everything else. And I love the way one person said, you know what you did in 2010 is you took roadkill and you picked up KBBF and it was roadkill, and you said, give it CPR and you can do it, si se puede, right? And what I didn't just do it alone. I did it with that original board of directors that I had 2 discussions with. One, I said, I'm about to enter this struggle to save KBBF. And I don't know yet if we're gonna do it. But if we don't do it, everybody will blame us. They'll say, you killed KBBF after 30 years. Or at that time, I think we were close to 40, you killed it. They're not gonna blame all the shit that happened in the past. They're gonna blame us in this room, I said. So I want to ask your commitment, like I have always asked workers. This is a commitment I make when I organize workers for 30 years or 40 years. I used to tell them, we gotta love each other. And the workers would always say, you're like a hippie. Well, you've been in Sebastopol too long, you're a hippie, And I said, no, I said, look, you gotta love each other. I said, secondly, I said, you have to accept each other's differences. During this union struggle, there'll be some of you that are going to do a lot of work, be on every picket line and every committee, and others won't do shit. Sorry, excuse the word, but they won't. I said, you cannot beat up on that co-worker who's not doing anything for the union struggle. You got to accept his differences or her differences. You got to do it together. And third, I said, if you take on the struggle of you wanting to be unionized, but the same thing I told that board, if you take on being on this board, we got to stick to the end. You finish the struggle. You don't back out. So I'm asking you right now, are you willing to make this? We're going to sacrifice a lot. We're going to probably sacrifice our families for a little bit, but we got to save KBBF if we give it the best. So at the end of the road, we can say we tried, and maybe we will make it, maybe we won't. And also be willing that if we don't make it, people will blame us and take it for, in your heart, that you weren't the cost of it, you gave it your best struggle. And then secondly, I said to all of them, if I find out that any of you are here for self-interest, I am gonna kick your ass. And and I said that both in English and Spanish, and they all laughed. And I said, no, I mean it. I am going to kick your ass if I find out that you are here for self-interest of KBBF. KBBF has just gone through a period of being abused, of being just beaten up and everything else, And I even used the word rape, which was very hard for me to say, but I told them, people have done this to KBBF. And now if you come in with a different agenda. The only agenda you got to do is to save KBBF. For why? To serve the community. KBBF is the instrument that has saved a lot of life, and we got to continue to serve the community. We're here to be servant of that community and through the airwaves. So you have to tell me right now and everything else. And that's when, later on, one of the guys said, it's not that I don't love the community. He's still a DJ and he's wonderful. And he said, I just don't know. I don't know how to be in meetings. I don't like meetings. They scare me and I can't, please let me go. It's not because I have a self-interest. I love KBBF and I'm gonna always be with you, Alicia, through the end of the struggle. And he's still with me 10 years later, but he just could not be. And that's when I realized I had to accept people's differences. I had to say, this brother cannot be, just tell me what to do and I'll do it, but I cannot be in the meetings. And it's true. And after 10 years, we have had, most of the board is still the same, but others have come and left. But the point of it is that we got KBBF now at a point where it's, striving, is doing good, it's serving the community, exactly what I wanted. I told them, this is my last hooray in the social movement. This is my last battle. I want to leave KBBF, whether I walk out because it's ready for me to have somebody else take over, or I pass on. I said, I wanted to continue for now. We're going to have almost 50 years. I said, 50 years more, to serving the community. And so for me, I came on, but I also got to tell you that my husband now, he is a person that believes in public radio so much. He supports KPFA here, because we're in California, he supports KPFA. And I always tell him, how come you don't support KBBF more the way you support KPFA? He goes, because I donated my wife to I already donated my wife to KBBF. What more do you want? You love KBBF more than you love me. And I go, come on, don't be insecure, and actually he's our volunteer engineer, because our other engineer right now, who just did an interview in the newspaper, said, it says captive engineer captive by KBBF, because the first time he came 10 years ago, he was in the audience and he shouldn't have told me he was an engineer. I didn't know at that time we needed a chief engineer, and I grabbed, and this is a tall white dude, 6'8", 6 feet 8 or something. And I told him, I said, what is a white dude doing here in this, usually, and question, because at that time I was suspicious, because we used to have spies. We had people really trying to put us down and everything. And he said, I tried to improve my Spanish. I listened to KBBF to learn more because it's bilingual and everything else. And I said, oh, okay. And I said, what do you do? And he said, I'm an engineer. And like he said, that was the last time he had a say-so. He became a permanent volunteer, volunteer, and I haven't let him go. And so the thing is, but my husband helps a little bit. He's an engineer, so he helps a little bit. But people will tell you that, it's like Alan says, for me, my love for KBBF is incredible. I see the power of, I now understand when my husband was talking about the power of public radio, when he said, he's the one that said, go and join this board. Like like I said, there's moments he regrets it. But for a little bit. Anyway, but he's the one that said, right now, and especially right now, like I said, this media that we got right now is really, we need more public radio. We need more, where the community are part of it, So anyway, for me, I now understand the power of public radio. I think we need to, we have an obligation to our community to serve it, and what better way through than the public media. So yeah, for me, that's how I came to it. And I'm still, I just completed my 10 years of being with KBBF and on the board, and and I'm proud of every single person that has come through. And what's so interesting is what Steve was talking about too. In one way, it's a little different. When I started 10 years ago, I had people that really, trashed me in our public meetings. And what I did is I would just listen to them. They would trash me, and because they didn't know my motives of why I was wanting to be on the board. And anyway, so they would say horrible things, and I would translate for them because there was, and after I translate, I say, so-and-so just said that I don't know what I'm doing, and that I don't know anything about radio, that what business do I have? And I said, and they're referring to me, Alicia. When she uses the name Alicia, because there's a whole bunch of other Alicia, she referring to me. And then after the speaker trashed me and I translated for her for the rest of the board, I would thank that speaker. And I said, thank you so much for your comments. Thank you very much. And not respond. And I told the board, when they came and trashed us in every board meeting, I told the board, we're going to go into a silence. Do not engage, because at first the board would be fighting with the audience. And I said, no more. Nobody, again, I will kick you out of this board, even though I have you here. I will kick you out if you respond to any of the negativism that people are. Do not engage. We are going to stick this out. And with time, all those voices silenced their criticism when they saw that we were committed, trying to save the board, which was the same interest they wanted. Just they didn't know about us. They didn't trust us that we were going to save KBBF. But when they realized, those people in the audience realized we had the same common thing to save KBBF, and they were programmers. They were programmers and we didn't throw them out when we came on into power. We didn't throw those programmers out.
So are you saying, Alicia, that when
criticizes?
putting
But
into
anyway, the point
action
is
the things that they were saying?
What?
Are you saying that when those people who were criticizing you, when they saw that you were putting into action things they were talking about, that's when they noticed that you were for real?
Yes, right. That they realized that, that I was trying to save KBBF, that it wasn't because because that election before was about power, people wanting to take, and realizing that, that no. And turns out that those people now are like the best volunteers I got. I can call them, the ones that put me, said things. They once in a while they say, yeah, señora, you came in, they call me señora and doña, which is a respected way of, like a Mrs., Mrs. Alicia, señora, when you came in, you didn't know nothing about radio. You didn't. You're the most honest person we know, but you didn't know nothing about radio. And that we had to just tell you, and everything else. And I tell them, you're right. You're right. I didn't know what FCC, CBS, ABC, what is it, CPA. I can't stand when people use those. I keep saying, say the whole darn name, for God's sake, so that people know, And so I told them, I said, I know, I know. But and then they said, you're the most honest person. You always, you just kept showing us being transparent. You told us, what you were doing. And we just, and a lot of them, now when I tell them that I want to leave, they said, no, you can't leave. But so it's been but it was hard. It was hard the 10 years, but we are in a place that for me, it's more important. It's not about me or anyone. It's about keeping KBBF on the air to service community. That's all that counts, and we got to do it, whatever it takes to do it. And we got to put our differences apart, and we got to find ways, to just focus on that one thread of unit common, something that we have in common. That thread, focus on it for right now, to accomplish our goals, and not, just because otherwise we're not gonna make it, and So to me, I just really believe that, that we just gotta, it's hard. It's really hard, but sometimes you gotta find, I like the way you said it. Go through the back door, through a different door, than the one we're using right now, because somehow in some situations it wasn't working, and, so anyway, that's it. Thank you.
It's cool to hear the parallels between both of your, I would say, leadership styles of finding common ground.
So I took I like the roadkill thing because we had a similar roadkill situation whenever I got to the station. So back in like 2007 and 8, I figured out that we needed a lot more oversight politically with the political actions in the community. So I started going around and live streaming in about 2009 and 10. I started going around live streaming important community events, candidate forums, town halls. So I had a lot of experience in just live streaming and the interest of increasing the oversight in the community. So the station that I'm with, that I'm the general manager, was in a similar roadkill place in late 2014. They were on the verge of turning the license back in, and keeping with the roadkill look or imagery, there were people surrounding it trying to figure out, well, maybe I can get a piece of it. And so for a number of different reasons, for the power, the glamour of being in radio or something. And none of them really were there to save the station, except for myself and my husband. And my husband was interested enough in saving the station that he began paying the bills. And the reason they were going to turn the license back in was because they couldn't pay the bills anymore, the former license holder. So it turns, so we prevailed, and the people who were in it for, let me get a piece of this and be a local star or something, they eventually fell to the wayside, and the operation of the station basically fell into my lap. It never would have occurred to me that by the way, this is my birthday, that I would end my life running a community radio station. But here's where I am. It's been since 2014 to 2020, so it's been 6 years that I've been at it, and it's been a tremendous learning curve. And I love what Alicia said about the first response being the "fuck you" response, because I had the same thing, and that's one of the things I've learned about myself, that I really need to get that part of my brain under control, step away, think about it overnight, and sure enough, the next day I always have a fresh, positive, or way to deal with whatever alerted that FU response in my brain. So for me, it's been a huge learning curve. It's been hard. I've met some incredible people that I never would have been exposed to before. And I feel like Alicia does. I want this to be my kind of the thing that I put most of the energy in for until I'm on my deathbed. And so that's where I'm at.
Wow.
Thank you.
So I'd actually like to share today, if that's okay. This is an interesting topic. This is Vertical from the Detour.
Yeah, Vertical, would love to hear from you.
and forgive me, I use an alias because these are being recorded. So, I mean, it's not like I'm doing anything bad, but I like to keep a little privacy to myself. But anyways,
Yeah, you bet.
I'm sorry?
Say, yeah, you bet.
Okay, cool. So, sorry, I'm on a phone, so I'm a little old school here. So we started the Detour in East Tennessee back in probably 2007. We saw a radio market that, of course, only had very conservative radio, and East Tennessee has a very large minority of liberal, progressive people. So we wanted to approach it from a different standpoint, especially since in 2007 there wasn't any LPFM window coming online. We looked at, what are the pros of LPFM versus just internet only, and we decided that the bureaucracy of having an LPFM, the cost, going through the FCC, the licensing, all of that was probably going to be a little too cost prohibitive for us. And plus we wanted to kind of service a broader area of all of East Tennessee, which is, roughly 200, from top to bottom, I'd say that's about 200 miles. So we decided to go internet only. And we initially started out with studios in Johnson City, which is in the Tri-Cities region, the Northeast region, and at a coffee house. And we had a little studio there, and it worked well for a number of years. But with us, all of us were working full time. We just didn't have the ability to continue that kind of an arrangement. And that coffee house also went out of business, so the next owner wanted to charge us rent. We just didn't do that. So we decided probably about 2009 that we were just going to be all remote. Like, everybody would have to have just a cheap microphone, get Winamp, broadcast to a shoutcast server, or send us pre-recorded shows. And then that's when we split out. And having an internet-only station also allowed us to split our talk programming and our music programming into two separate channels. We also took a different approach with community radio. Instead of just primarily focusing on progressives, we tried to identify other viewpoints that weren't being represented in our market, but also had more of a piece, that kind of approach to things. And so we don't just have progressive talk on our station. We also have, I think we have a libertarian show, and I think we even have a from the social, I can't even remember, but we tried to kind of bring different viewpoints to everybody so that, they can see, more of a peace and loving kind of a viewpoint, I guess. And then our music station, is just free form. And the other thing that we try to distinguish is, a lot of community radio stations just focus on independent media, which is awesome. But there's a lot of mainstream media that is also independent, which, I would consider, even though Tom Hartman is mainstream, I would also consider him independent. And so we feature both independent and mainstream opinions on our station, like the Young Turks. We have Stephanie Miller, but we also feature Ian Masters and Democracy Now! And even some smaller programming as well. So yeah, we tried to take a different approach in that. Like I said, we have all of our DJs, all of our hosts have always had their own setup. We've tried to provide them with a very cost-effective way of doing that, which is as simple as using. And I know this is terrible audio quality, but we really coach them on, getting a microphone if you can. But I mean, we in the past we've had someone just use a microphone built into their laptop to deliver us a really awesome show, which we were okay with. That was the other thing. We definitely try to focus on quality as much as we can, but we weren't, at the end of the day, our promos weren't going to sound super professional. We're just doing the best we can, because honestly, we can get by with probably about $150 a month in expenses. And we have a very small board of directors for our nonprofit, just so, legally we're not exposing ourselves. But I think this different model has helped. Now, unfortunately, with this model, though, I have noticed that a lot of our listeners aren't local. We have a very broad audience from international and from many states from around the United States, but our listenership in East Tennessee isn't where I want it to be. And I think we really need to continue to focus more on local programming. But unfortunately, as we've moved from in 2007, we had quite a lot of volunteers with the station. But as we move forward in time, people have discovered new mediums like podcasts and other forms of, YouTube, Twitch, other ways of doing their shows. And they've lost interest in a community radio station that simply streams audio. So, we're trying to figure out, and we do carry a handful of those podcasts, but they're not tailoring they're not following our time clock. And they're, they randomly start and stop, and it's just inconsistent. So, we're really trying to think of ways that we can, get more local programming back and going. But anyways, that's my story. So now we're based out of Knoxville. Like I said, we don't have the listenership that we once had, but we still, have a pretty good population of people. And thank you to Pacifica for allowing us to use your programming and really bring, like I said, we try to bring an opinion to East Tennessee. And so we set up that, before COVID, we were setting up at different fairs, and they would have the East Tennessee Regional Fair that we would set up a booth at in the nonprofit section. And, we would go to the Pride Fest, and we would participate in Martin Luther King Day. But of course, because of all of COVID, all of that stuff's been canceled. So we're basically now just, barely using social media, because I work full time, and my full-time job has been as more demanding as I've ever been since we've had to work from home. So unfortunately, we just don't have the staff. I know I'm rambling, but I just wanted to share our story real quick.
Thank you. That was wonderful. You guys sound like a lean machine down there, and with your keeping your finances in the row, and that's so cool that you really work to reach out to get as many different points of view as you can. And hearing everyone talk, as all of you guys, is just really inspiring, because all of you are just passionate about what you do, and that's why you do it. And
So let me ask him how he gets the Young Turks in, because are they, if you just go
So back in 2000, while we did back in 2009, I sent an email to their producer, and I said, "Hey, we have a community station. Would you care if we run your program?" And back in the day, they said, "Sure, that's fine." And we even got Jank to record a few promos for us, and ever since then, they've grandfathered us in. So we just used the audio version of their podcast. They gave us a press account, and we get to rerun their show. I don't know if that arrangement could be made for any other community radio stations. And the other thing, Young Turks are not FCC friendly, so being internet only,
yeah.
We can do that, but
Right.
But yeah, so you couldn't run, and their clock's definitely not on the money, but we make it work. So that's how we were very lucky. I was even surprised that they said yes, but that is one of our more popular shows, and we don't get to run the the post game show and other things. And again, we can't syndicate that out to anyone else, and we can't run it on. We're not an FM station, but we couldn't,
Right.
of course, put that on there without you all cleaning it up. And there's so much in there to clean up that I wouldn't recommend it. So.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
oh gosh. Well, that's
Stephanie?
what's that? Yeah.
One of the, latest things that technology is streaming. So you might have a local radio station, but if you have streaming, anybody in the world can hear you if they have internet, right?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what Vertical does. He says he's got people all over the world.
I think that levels the playing field.
How so?
It does and it doesn't. We don't, when you look at the map of where we have people listening from, we have a lot of people from the South. I think our listenership comes from more of the Southeast, more of the West Coast, though. It's funny. We have so many people that listen in California, and our listenership jumps up about 10 o'clock Eastern, because that's when we have we start out with Randy Rhodes, and then we have Stephanie Miller, and then we have a few replays in the app. Like I think we have Attitude with Arnie and all that stuff, and then we have a replay of Hartman. This is just on the talk station. So it's just funny how popular overnights are. And then you can also see we have a lot of people from Asia, China, especially China. Like we get so many listeners from China, which is very interesting to me overnight. So that is a pro, but the cons are like, and if you all have any ideas, like how do I get more people from East Tennessee itself to tune in? And I think maybe I need to have an app. Like we don't have an app. We tell people to go through TuneIn to listen. So maybe I need to get an app. Maybe we need to try to do more focused, recruiting around here. I don't know, but the listenership in East Tennessee itself is definitely a lot lower than it was, maybe a handful of people at the most.
Anyone else have any thoughts?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I'd like to finish. I'm sorry. Years ago, the signals, every radio station had their own signal. Some of them were big, some of them were small. So if you had a big signal, you could broadcast over a wide locality. But now, with streaming, you could be anywhere and you could stream, and somebody listening to my broadcast in Albany can hear it in China if you have streaming. And that's what I mean by leveling the playing field. You don't have to have a big signal nowadays. All you have to have is streaming, I think.
That's a good point, and I'd like to add, like, what is the point, honestly, of having an FM signal? I mean, especially with I'm just giving you my own honest opinion. When I try to listen to LPFM, it is so hard to listen on my phone. I can get my car radio with my car doesn't have an antenna, and I can listen to it for a number of miles, but that's about it. And it just seems like maybe an outdated form of transmission, I guess. And maybe my opinion is wrong or flawed, and that maybe someone else has an opinion. But to me, LPFM is an old, and FM in general, to be honest, AM especially, is just more of an old school way of doing things. And the newer ways, like using YouTube Live and Twitch and streaming, are the future. So I don't know.
Well, I've been thinking about this a lot, and you're correct that 100 watts is not very much. But what it does is all of the people who have loved radio in the past, grew up with radio, if you invite them or tell them they can do a show on your LPFM and that it can be streamed all over the world, it's another reason for them to do it. And we're getting a new show coming in from a gentleman who podcasts, and he's got a big audience in the States, but also in Israel. And we told him, well, it's just a little low power station with a 18-mile radius around town. And he goes, I don't care. I want to be on radio. So it just depends. I do think that radio is in a real paradigm shift where these new technologies can greatly enhance the reach of your 100 watts by using digital means. We live stream when we have people in the station. We live stream to social media if that particular show host wants to do it. And I think that combining digital video live streaming and using the internet to spread your station around the world you're going to have to do it basically, or else that low power station isn't, it's going to continue to kind of struggle, I think. So I think you're right.
Like when I do my shows with Steve, then I put it, when it's aired on the radio, I I put it on Facebook. I say I'll be on 9:30 and 6:30 with Steve Greenfield talking about such and such. And if you're not if you're not in the Albany area, we stream live. And then I put the link to the live stream right under it. So people who are anywhere in the world can hear Steve and I talk.
Yeah, it's sort of can be local and international at the same time.
Right.
So going back to, so I come to Asheville, you know, we're only 2 hours away, and I'll come to Asheville sometime, and that's WPBM, right?
Yes.
I can barely get you all on the west side. I mean, and now again, I'm in a car without an antenna, so I don't know. I mean, is 18 miles like being very liberal with that range, or is it?
No, I keep testing it because we've got an antenna on our car, and so I start picking up the frequency at the Parkway on I-26, and I can stay all the way across on I-26 north of Asheville to something called New Stock Road, and that's 18 miles. And I have picked it up out as far as Candler and Canton. And I think it's because we're in the valley and we're surrounded by these granite mountains. I think that affects our signal in a very positive way. Now,
Right. Okay. That's good.
On the east side of town, splitting maybe half a mile from the station, is a granite mountain called Town Mountain, and that stops the signal until you get out about 1.5 miles from on the other side of that mountain, and then you pick it up again. So I periodically I'll do a drive around town. I'll get up on the Parkway and drive around on the east side of town just to see how far the signal is going. But it's well past that 3-mile radius that you normally people say that you can get with your 100 watts. And I honestly think it's because being in the valley surrounded by granite mountains.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I of course haven't done as much surveying as you have, so that's good to know. I'll try next time I'm in town. I'll try again and maybe bring something with an antenna this time too. So thank you.
Yeah, and stop by sometime. I'll give you a tour of the station.
Yeah, I tried. We were down there a few months ago, and I guess you all have relocated from from next to that arena. I guess.
Yeah.
You all used to be in that housing complex.
Right. We're on Wall Street, and just shoot me a message, and I'll meet you downtown, and we'll have a radio chat.
Oh, that'd be great. Thank you. I'll plan on doing that. Thank you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Well, I see we're coming up on 4:30, but Alicia, did you have something that you wanted to say?
Yes, I was just going to mention that it was the whole thing. We're streaming now, even though we have a big range. We cover almost in 1973 we covered 18 counties.
Wow.
So and now we only cover around 11 or 12 because depending because of there's other like you said, other radio stations coming in and everything else, and we get but what happens is we decided to do streaming, and that's why I even put it on my thing, kbbf.org, because what we have done is that we have like I said, our programmers are predominantly Spanish speakers. Our programmers are, but we do have English speakers, bilingual ones also, different people. But many of them now are so happy that their relatives in Mexico can hear their program, so they even have interviews from Mexico and in other areas, and but it's predominantly Mexico. And at one point, I think, Central America, we got some from El Salvador and Nicaragua, and so, but and also one of the things in English that we do cover is, Tom Hartman is a big hit, Democracy Now, and Richard Wolff, and so we used to carry Ring of Fire, but we haven't yet, and we cover a lot, and also with Pacifica, it helps us to get others the affiliation, so we cover English also, because sometimes people always say, oh, that's a Mexican station. And I go, no, it's a bilingual, know, it's actually multilingual now because we can even carry in the indigenous languages. So a lot of them, so yeah, streaming is there for us. It really widen more our audience, you know, and people like it, and the farm workers like it too because they can out in the fields they can hear it with their cell phone, you know, and so that you know, in case some of them used to have remember transistor radios? Some of them still even have those little with batteries,
Wow.
but now I get surprised when I see I always tell the farm workers, what the hell, you have a better telephone than I do. He goes, well, my whole life depends on this, you know, Facebook with my family and streaming, you know, when I do my program and all that. So anyway, we're blessed with streaming.
I never thought about it though like that, where you might have more traditional people wanting to listen via an FM radio. And data, you know, you have to have a data plan in order to listen to my radio station. But with an FM radio, you don't, you know, other radio stations, you just have to have a device without any cost, really, and you can listen. So that's a really good point.
Excellent. That's a good place to end it, I think, for today. Thank you, guys. This was an amazing conversation. It's really nice to, I don't know, these small groups are nice. Everyone gets to talk a little more and go a little more in depth. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And
When's the next meeting after the new year?
that's what I'm thinking. I think the next week one would fall on Christmas Eve, and I think we should probably skip that one. So
right.
Not going to change
after the new year, maybe we'll shoot for that. And
okay.
So in the meantime, yeah, happy holidays to everybody, and thanks again for joining.
Happy holidays to all of you. Many blessings.
Okay, take care.
Especially in the next year.
Yes.
All right.